Hey friends, we are in Dallas for UFC 211. I want to thank Fierce Supply. Go to fiercesupply.com. And they got new stuff coming out. They got a women's line coming. They've been really supportive. So if you support us, please support them. Look at it's my friend Jon Anik. Jon, how are you, man?
My man, I'm well. Good to see you here on the UFC Road Show as usual.
Yeah, it's a circus, and it's normal for you now. This all just feels like your job now?
It does, yeah. You become conditioned to it, I think, like anything else in life. I never liked to fly, and I've flown all over the world, hundreds of thousands of miles per year. I'm coming up on my 100th UFC show, and yeah, you do become conditioned to it. It's hard being away from the kids. They become more conditioned to it, but this is the biggest, best fight card, at least on paper, that I've ever been assigned to. So needless to say, I'm jittery. I don't know if it's the coffee or I'm just excited.
Well, it is a brilliant fight card, but they keep coming because that's the nature of the game. By the time, nobody will be seeing this until after it's been announced that Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier are also fighting. By the time you're watching this, that's a thing. Then after them, it'll be another thing and another thing, because the game just keeps expanding and the athletes keep getting better and the fights keep going further.
It's interesting because when you have a fight card like this, a lot of fans think, oh, the UFC's stacking the deck in Dallas, and it actually materializes not because there's some promotional incentive to load up one show, but you have injuries. Right. We loaded up for UFC 205 last November, so you had a couple champions who were idle and not competing in the first quarter. 208 and 209 were pretty lean, 210 was pretty good, but this is the result of champions getting healthy and big fights coming together at the perfect time, and it's just going to be crazy to see how it all plays out. A lot of pick'em fights. I can't wait, you know.
You like to go in and talk about some of the odds, and that's an interesting perspective because you're looking at their skills and their attributes and what they do, but you're also looking at waves of other people betting, the influence of people and people like myself on the odds makers. You know, things that get out there and become you know, we are saying Jorge Masvidal is a mind-blowing fighter because I know that's true. But not everybody knew that was true, and now they kind of feel like it is. Things like that, like feeling and vibe and flavor influences the odds.
No doubt about it. And it's interesting, too, when you talk about Jorge Masvidal, because that Donald Cerrone performance was so seminal and so great, and that has affected the betting line. Damian Maia opened as the favorite, and Jorge Masvidal will probably close as the favorite. But I'm a degenerate gambler, right? I've been betting on sports almost every day for 20 years. I'm contractually prevented from betting on the UFC for obvious reasons, right? So I don't bet the UFC, but I've always found it to be an interesting lens through which to look at professional sports, whether it's American football or NBA basketball or mixed martial arts. So what I'll do when I get a fight card, I will write what I think the odds will be, and then juxtaposed against what the odds actually are. And I will say for your audience, I thought Damian Maia, on the strength of a 6-fight winning streak and what he did against Carlos Condit, would be favored against Jorge Masvidal, minus 160, minus 180 or so. He did open as a slight favorite, but I will admit to being a little bit surprised that there was that type of volume on Masvidal to swing the pendulum. I mean, Vegas, they want two-way action, right? Ultimately, they set the line with the goal that they will get bets on both sides, and it seems like at least right now the action's coming in on Game Break.
And I am surprised by that too, and I know, you know, yes, people's memory is short, so they are seeing highlight reels of him hitting Donald overhand right, dropping Donald comes out drilling him again. The way he's kind of, the swagger can influence people too. Like Jorge Masvidal is quite certain that Jorge Masvidal can slay any other man, and you can feel that, but I am still surprised as well. Maybe personality affects it as well, because Damian Maia is a quiet, humble,
100%.
You know, maybe that affects the audience, but the audience's reaction to things is a fascinating thing.
Well, 100%, and I also think, too, sometimes you got to determine what is sharp action, right, and what is square action, right, and that's basically, so sharp money is wise guys in Vegas, you know, professional bettors. Square, guys like me, the betting public, right? So one handicapper said to me, we've taken almost 100 bets on Yair Rodriguez, but those aren't necessarily sharp bets, right? So a lot of people, I think, sharps will look at Frankie Edgar with years of UFC experience at close to even money, and, you know, you're betting the number, you're not betting the fighter, and that's hard for people to understand, right? So I can look at Damian Maia and say, I'm getting Damian Maia at even money, even if I don't think he's going to win the fight. fight. There is value on Damian Maia in that range, and I'm going to pull the trigger, you know? But Masvidal's confidence is just something else, man. And I guess for me, I just feel like there's going to be a big strength discrepancy. I mean, Damian Maia is a middleweight who has found his groove here at 70, but I think that's going to be something that Gamebrett's going to have to overcome. It's just the physicality of Damian Maia.
For sure. But Damian is also kind of a gentle physical guy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? He flows with you. But it is going to be fascinating. But you said something interesting there that I just thought about. I reacted viscerally to. And that you bet the number, not the fighter. And I just can't bet math. Like, I mean, I don't really bet a lot anyways. And in fact, I haven't placed a bet for years, and when I started to even bet $1 or $2 with fighting with my friends, I realized it changed my perspective entirely.
Interesting.
Like entirely. Instead of sitting there and letting the fight unfold and just feeling it and tasting it happen, I was leaning like towards the person that I needed.
Right.
And I've watched friends of mine that are betting on fights, and they'll say bet the over or the under. And there's action at that moment in time, and they're getting all nervous because they're watching for a result or an outcome or the consequences. And I'm kind of, my enjoyment of fighting is just letting it happen and letting it go. So that is a really, really interesting thing.
I mean, when I was at ESPN, I would bet the UFC all the time, but I think I've been betting for so many years that I don't necessarily watch it through the lens of, hey, I got action on Sergio Pettis, so subconsciously I'm thinking he's winning the fight. But it is interesting that you bring that up. If you got under 2.5 rounds and all of a sudden a finish starts to materialize and everybody gets all excited.
And it's at 220 and you needed it by 229, but
right,
it's not in there.
Right.
You know, it can influence the way you watch it. There was something I was thinking about when I heard you talking about the job and about preparation and working, and I commentate. I've commentated close to 400 shows.
Unreal.
Because we, at Fight Network, Ramdeen and I, sometimes we would do multiple shows a week. So we would do old shows, recalling old shows, which is fascinating because you're studying history and then trying to understand why they were making those choices in the context of that era. So what did they not know, or what did they believe about combat at that time? So that really was valuable. But you were talking about the hard work is in advance, and then if you've done everything right in preparation, you go in and the job comes easier. That's how you feel, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really in a good mood until I get to the arena because all the preparation is finally in the rearview mirror. And we were supposed to have 14 fights on this fight card. We're obviously only going to have 12, and I'm not rooting for anybody to get injured, but prepping 28 fighters is no joke. Now, it's a little bit easier because we were dark the last 2 weeks, but when we're ramping up and doing 3 shows in 3 weeks, something's fallen through the cracks. There's just only so many hours in the day, and you don't want to be watching film or taking notes when your mind is fried. So sometimes you have to listen to your brain and say, look, this is not going to be fruitful if I'm studying right now. But 28 guys on which to watch film, something's fallen through the cracks. There's only so much you can do. It's interesting, though, you mentioned calling fights that have already happened, because there was one time Ken Flo and I did a UFC fight night in Japan, and they lost all the audio. So we had to fly to LA and recall those 12 fights. So I think I remember saying to Craig Borsari, one of my bosses, I was like, so I'm gonna predict this knee to the head knockout. Right? I mean, we know what's happening, but that was a weird situation to go call 12 fights in which you already knew what had happened. You know? So
what I was thinking when you were talking about that, and I agree with you 100%, if you've done all the preparation, now you're just going to go in there and flow and let it happen. And if enough of the knowledge is kind of in your skin, and you're in a state of good performance, it'll just happen. Well, that's what you're calling with those guys too. They've done all this preparation, they've done all this training, they've trained to have it happen, and on the night, they're performing, their state of performance is very similar to yours. And you're not going to get kicked in the head. But people don't underperform because they might get kicked in the head. They underperform because of the consequences of failure. Ridicule, being embarrassed, feeling like the world will judge you. And you deal with that, and as does anybody who performs in any kind of live environment, just like a fighter does.
Yeah, I think there's a parallel to be drawn for sure, and there's definitely negativity that you have to try to tune out. I'm most sensitive to the criticism, constructive or otherwise, from family and friends, right? Because oftentimes when a fighter is walking, this is my chance for his or her family or friends to really sell this guy. This is his moment, right? And so when I have a coach or a friend or a family member take issue with something I've commentated, that is something that I will attack immediately and something that I'm very sensitive to. But it's just something that comes with the territory. I remember calling my first UFC show. It was January of 2012 in Nashville, Tennessee. I got off the air and it was just an avalanche of hate and criticism.
Shit.
And ultimately, you know, as long as Dana White was okay with the performance, that's ultimately what mattered. But I did not have my post-fight cheeseburger that night. I was not happy, you know, and it was hard for me to deal with early on. Now I am so desensitized to it that
you're
it doesn't
also
even register.
Really good at what you do, and you know it, and you get it from people who get it.
Well, thank
you. Hear that from people who get it.
Feelings mutual, sir.
Thank you. But I can imagine at that time, if you're getting an avalanche of shit from the beginning, your concern isn't even the work. It's, holy shit, if everybody doesn't like me, how's this going to affect my job? And how's that going to affect my family? And it's
100%.
You know, it's not about the work. It's about, again, we were talking about how an audience can influence things. Audiences can bring down, like, United Air, and they can they can react to all kinds of things like that. But I think, and you know this, the people in the top of the UFC know you're the best at this, and you really are. As a broadcaster doing that, and that's coming from a fight obsessive, you're the best in the game at it right now.
Thank you very much for that.
You know, and so they knew that from the beginning, which is why, you know, if a couple of people freak out on Twitter for a month, it didn't affect you. But it must have been scary to see that.
Yeah, it was hard, and you're right. Just like commentators fuel public perception, you know, so does social media, and so do the masses. If they don't like something and they scream loud enough, then maybe a change will be made. But I also have to stay in my lane and play to my strengths, right? I was not a lifelong martial artist. I grew up playing stick and ball sports. I dabbled with karate a little bit, boxing in my 20s, and now I am training at American Top Team West Palm Beach with Pahumpa, a little jiu-jitsu here and there, right? But I came into this as a sort of pro sports broadcasting guy, right? So I've talked to you about this a lot off the air, that ultimately I stay true to who I am, and I can't, you know, take Joe Rogan's background and make it mine. You know, I'm not a Taekwondo champion. I don't have those credentials. So I try to play to my strengths. I try to shore up my weaknesses, and ultimately let all of you great analysts shine when the action's going on. That's what I'm there for. Yeah,
you've heard me say publicly, and I've said it to you, that I want to sit next to you and call the UFC.
Let's do it.
That could be 3 years from now. That could be 6 years from now. It can be 11 years from now. You might move or do something else, or move up in the world, or have 75 kids, or buy a baseball team or something. But I'm going to end up there at some point in my life. But this is the first time we've sort of worked together. As much as we chat and hang out, and this is the first time it kind of works.
I'm loving it, man. Yeah. No, I also say with chemistry, like, you either have it or you don't. And I remember the first time I worked with Joe Rogan, a lot of people don't realize it was all the way back in 2013, and people say, oh, how's it go? And I really think that if that night we didn't click, Joe probably would have been like, dude, you know, this guy just can't hang, you know? So I do think it happens pretty quickly. We've talked off the air. This is the first time on the air, but you know, I've been a long-time fan of your work, and I watched everything you've done and ingested all of the content, and I do believe that few people in the mixed martial arts space, media, fighters, fans, anyone, have as high a public approval rating as you do. And I think it's because of not just the quality of your work, but the angle at which you attack it. You know, I just think that you are approaching your analysis from a different lens than anyone really has done previously, and I think you should be proud of the response. You know?
Thank you. I am. The last 7 or 8 weeks, I've learned a lot about doing a job and about trying to do something that matters, and I am proud of it. And Mark has been killer. I mean, I told you, 8 weeks ago I didn't know him.
Right,
now
crazy.
We've made 50 things. We have 10,000 people following us, subscribing on YouTube. It's been really cool. But it's also been challenging because I was in a role where all day, every day, all I did was analyze fighting and talk about it. And now I'm like having to learn about YouTube and having to figure out how you light stuff, and watching video on lighting a room and getting feedback on different things, and learning about, you know, the change. I've watched the changes in martial arts, and I watch the evolution, and I watch how certain things create a success and other things supersede it. And that's how, and technology is doing that, and communications is doing that. So as much as it's been hard, and it hasn't allowed me to watch as much tape as I like to, which feels weird, watching something else change and grow and watching and learning that whole system, I think has given me kind of a parallel, different angle to look at things.
Yeah, well, and you're having to be an entrepreneur a little bit. I am so inspired by guys like Joe Rogan and Brendan Schaub in particular. That dude's entrepreneurial spirit is just absurd. I mean, look at what he's built, really from the ground up. I wouldn't have a podcast if it weren't for Brendan. I mean, I just wouldn't. I was inspired to get into the space because I saw what he was able to do with The Fighter and the Kid. And our show is different. It's more hard news and information in mixed martial arts, but I have an agent, so I don't have to deal with that contract shit, right? This YouTube stuff and the technical stuff scares the piss out of me.
Yeah, me too.
That's my podcast is not on YouTube because I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
It scared me too, and literally the suddenly when I got it, when I understood how you could approach it, was be scared, be terrible at it, do that publicly, and then challenge yourself to get better and invite people to come along. And some people be like, oh, really? This guy sucks at this? It sounds weird. His living room looks stupid. They didn't know each other. And say, yeah, but we're going to learn. And I think documenting the path of going from, and as I call it, white belt to wherever you're going to get to, that parallel of martial arts is in everything in your life. Whatever it is you want to learn how to do, mostly is going to involve you sucking at it, accepting the fact that you're going to be the worst guy in the room at something for some length of time, attempting to figure out what you're going to need to learn. Never mind learning it, figure out what you're going to need to learn, and then go ahead and learn it. And in the process of that, you're going to have to sacrifice some other things, and you're going to have to be tired and scared.
Right.
And that's all any of us do with anything. So once I understood that in and of itself, even if nobody was interested, I'd be really proud to look back at that, then it was a lot easier to do.
I do admire the fact, though, that you immediately started pushing out content, because I know myself, and I probably would have wallowed a little bit, and you maintained the momentum that you had by staying in the space. And I'm sure at times that wasn't easy to do, and it seemed like, I think, for your supporters that within a couple weeks you're up and running, and maybe they're not getting as extensive a video breakdown as they're used to, but they're still getting content from you that has become a part of their lives. I mean, that's what's so special about it. I know I'm digressing a little bit here, but just talking to fans here, and when people bring up my podcast or bring up your YouTube channel, I mean, these people are invested, and if we take a week off on our podcast and people refresh their phone and it's not there, there's a void in their week, and that's a pretty special connection.
It is, and it's meaningful, because all you have to do to appreciate that is think of the things that you really look forward to. Whatever that thing, oh man, whether that's a television show or a movie or a song or something that someone made, and how much that means to you, and then think, wow, some amount of people feel that about shit that I make.
Right.
It is really, really cool, man.
I'm going to see Rogan tonight, and I mean, how cool that if I could do anything in the world tonight, my wife's flying in. What do I want to do? I want to go see Joe Rogan perform live, and I get to sit next to the guy and call 12 fights tomorrow night. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, really cool, man. Yeah, you know what? You're living your best life. Can you tell? Do you feel like you are?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, trying to be a sports radio guy. I eventually got into ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut. But when ESPN became the goal, I never thought I would leave.
Right.
But I got sick of being a highlight machine in the studio, and that's what I was. And it seemed like it was sort of a dead end. I wanted to do more live events, sort of like you. I wanted to be in the moment and do play-by-play. And maybe I was thinking more football and boxing than mixed martial arts at the time. I did get a chance to do a WBC heavyweight championship at ESPN, but the play-by-play opportunities were few and far between. And I felt like in this world, having a niche, I think would help me as a broadcaster. But man, I mean, I cringe when I go back and watch some of those first fights I called. I mean, geez, fucking terrible. You're supposed
to. I mean, no matter, even if you thought it was great, or even if it was by the standard of whatever was in the world was really great, you still want to 100 later think it sucks.
Yeah.
Because that means you've grown a lot.
Yeah, right.
And I don't have any rules. Like people who watch our YouTube channel, we joke around, there are no rules, except you have to learn something. You have to be learning something. Whatever that thing is. You want to go learn to play piano? Cool. You want to learn to cook? Cool. You want to learn to train your dog? Cool. But you have to learn something, and you have to be in a state of learning something all the time, or your life isn't going to be getting better every day.
Right. No, that's true.
I was talking to Yves Edwards today, who's just like...
What a stud,
Yeah, like, I'm a huge fan of Yves Edwards. First, I was as a fighter, and then I did a show with him for UFC online thing that we did together while we were watching fights that you guys were calling.
Halo Wars 2 or something.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah. No, that was Iron Fist.
Okay.
This was Iron Fist.
Right, yeah.
Which have you watched it? It's actually.
I have not.
It's very good.
Yeah.
So then I hung out with Yves, and he was like, he's the coolest guy going. And I saw I saw him today, and I said, "How's life?" And he goes, "Brother, it's getting better every day." And I smiled and I said, "That's the way it should be."
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, if you're doing it right." And he smiled and goes, "Thank you," and just walked away. But it's true.
It is true.
And it's very easy to be in a situation. Life doesn't always go perfectly. But as long as tomorrow, something you're doing today is with the idea that tomorrow you're going to be better at something, or a little happier, or learn something, or get a little stronger, life becomes a lot easier.
And you got to enjoy the work that you do. I mean, there's a lot of my preparation that is menial by nature, but I enjoy doing my fighter cards. I mean, I have an identical twin brother who tried to be an actor. He owns a check cashing business in Florida, and he's sitting at a window half his life and totally miserable. And I sometimes sit around as I'm watching film and doing a fighter card, like I'm getting paid to do this preparation right now. It's a special thing. You know, my preparation, in terms of the time, the hours spent, hasn't changed, but it really has evolved so much. And, you know, Brian Stan certainly deserves credit for helping me raise my game. That dude goes into Marine mode. It's like, look the fuck out, you know? But it's just crazy the way that guy attacks life. He's forced me to raise my game, no doubt about it. But it's just an amazing world, this UFC world and this space. And, you know, thankfully we're both a small part of it, you know?
Jon, and thank you, man. You've gone out of your way to give me advice and help me out with all kinds of things, and I really appreciate that. I'm always going to appreciate that. And when I'm sitting next to you in X amount of years, I'll buy the first round of beers.
My next career is a sports agent. I want you as my client, and I won't charge you 10%. We'll do like 2.5.
Deal.
Pleasure.
Love it.
Mark, thank you, buddy.
Jon Anik.